Witi Underwater was made by Te Pūrongo Productions for Te Reo Irirangi o Aotearoa, with support from Te Māngai Pāho. Just a heads up, near the end of this episode, there's discussion of a sexual assault. Kia tūpato e hoa mā.
Mānawa mai e te rangi irunga nei. Mānawa mai e te papa iraro nei. Mānawa mai ngā mākuru ki runga ki e nei taura, ki runga ki e nei tauira. E te wāhi ngaro, uhia mai tō koutou korowai aroha, tō koutou korowai manaaki, kia tau iho ko ngā tō mai rangi ata whae ki runga ki a mātou. Hei ārahi, hei tohu i a mātou, ki te tika, ki te pono, ki te rangi Māori e. Kia tūturu e rangi, kia tūturu e papa, kia whakamau ai kia tīnā.
Tīnā,
Haumi e, hui e, taiki e.
I'm in the car with Aotearoa literary royalty, Witi Ihimara.
that was wonderful.
Kei roto maua ko Eugene te kai whakaputa I te motokā.
I can be off.
You can be off.
I can go dreadfully bad.
We're dropping Witi home after an interview.
I love how you're describing the feeling around not having the reo without...
All three of us are learning te reo Māori. Witi's doing full-time mane ki te paraere, rumaki reo at Takiura. Meanwhile, te ara, the path that Eugene and I are taking is less intense, via te wānanga o Aotearoa and Kurapō. We all get to talking about the many challenges, he maha na wero, of learning.
What I'm battling against is memory retention.
Not that it seems to be slowing him down. If there's one thing we've learned following him on his haerenga reo Māori this year, it's that he knows exactly where he's going
Go left.
go left.
and exactly how to get there.
Where those cars are parking, you can go right. Just follow them.
All right.
Yes. Okay, you two, I'm not going to detain you. Stay in the car. Hey, catch you later.
And he's off. Like I said, he knows where he wants to go, does Papa Witi.
Korau mau mahara te kai patu o te rā waki o te pāpauri nō reira tēnei te
Koinei te marangataka Māori e te whānau, ka pai koinei ngā tohu.
E te hapa ira.
Ringa ringa pakia, wai takahia e kino
He Māori ahau, e noho Māori ana, ki tōku ao Māori.
Urirana, tēnā koutou, kia rā mai tātou kato.
Ko Adam Daringahau, ko Witi Underwater tēnei, he kōnai iparangi, e rema o na wāhanga, a 5-part podcast about what happens when a literary legend is thrown in the deep end, ki te wai hōhonu. O wāhanga tuatoru, te hītori.
Kia ora.
We're back at Takiura to sit in on another class with Witi. We've arrived in time for Paramanua, the morning break. So I thought I'd bring scones, since they'd been such a hit when I took them to Witi's back in Wāhanga Tuatahi. Everyone seems relaxed. Kua rere te kōrero ōpaki. But then I realise I've made a terrible hapa mistake.
Apologies for the scones. They're not as good as they need to be. Too much baking powder, I think.
The scones taste really odd, but my warning's a bit late. Most of them have already been eaten. Mō taku he e hoa mā. Anyway, we head into class.
Ka pai. Nō reira, ka haere tonu tātou, ka pai. Aha kua kai konei te whānau e noho ki wanganui a tātou, ka haere tonu.
Shah really has a knack for taking complex language ideas and making them easy
Harry,
and fun.
ki tō whakaro ka toi te whakatangi tira.
Like during today's vocab session, when she holds up a picture of a toilet.
Ke whea tēnei.
It seems just about everyone knows at least a couple of words for toilet. Wharepaku, whareiti, but also
Heke tua.
heketua. But then Shah asks her akomanga to look inside that last word.
He ha tēnei mea te heke tua. Whakamārama, he whakaaro anō rānei, mō tēnei heke tua. He ha te heke. Koinei te heke. Ka heke, ka haere ki tua. Beyond. Ka pai? Koinei tēnei kupu. Ka te tahi me te rua, ke te kōrero tiko, ki konei, tahi me te rua.
So things got a bit wild there, but essentially, Shah was inviting the class to visualise how, when you go to the heke-tua, something unmentionable descends, heke, and when you press flush, it is conveyed somewhere beyond, tua, heke, tua, heke-tua. Entertaining, but there's a serious point here. Often, if you break a word down, the meaning is hiding there.
Maha o ngā kupu kapa e roto i te kupu te whakamārama. Nō reira koinei, whare paku, heke tua rānei. Ka pai?
Same as one of those other words for toilet, whare iti. Break it down and it means little house. So Shah ends with a warning. If you happen to live in a modest dwelling and want to tell someone about that, be careful with your choice of words.
Kia tūpato, mena kei te kōrero koutou e pāna ki tō whare, kaua e ki he whare iti tōku. Ei, ka pōhehe o, koinei te o, koinei te whare iti. Nō reira me hurihia ngā kupu, he iti tōku whare. Ko kite te rerekētanga, ka pai?
Kāti. Let's move on from kōrero hamuti, toilet talk. Another part of kura is practicing waiata, in this case, aku mahi, a waiata composed in 1928 by Kōhine te Whakarua Pōnika, no Nai Tuhoi Ngāti Parau. It's beautiful, he waiata a tāhua, and an all-time banger. Witi sings along enthusiastically. Waiata are a big part of takiura, as they are in te ao Māori in general, because every day, alongside vocab and grammar, toira are learning and practicing some of the taonga of Māori culture, and also crafting their own. So there's waiata, there's karakia, which you can translate as prayer or blessing, but really both those words are too narrow a definition for these incantations, traditional or modern, which are woven into every occasion and every part of the day. And there's whai kōrero. Formal speech making. This is Tauira Tipene Message, no te aupori, speaking at Hui Whānau, a weekly gathering at Takiura that's full of karakia, whai kōrero and waiata.
Tōreira e hoa mā, manaki a tātou anō, kia whiwhi ai tātou katoa i ngā hua o tātou nei ao Māori. Huri rana, tēnā koutou, kia ora mai tātou katoa.
Takiura and its world of tikanga Māori, of kawa, of waiata, to be immersed in all of this is filling Papa Witi's nāko. You can hear it in his voice as we leave the akomanga with him one day. And down the corridor we can hear another akomanga practicing aku mahi. Witi stops walking, turns his tāringa towards the waiata coming from the other classroom and slips into almost a meditative state.
He rongoa. Ka haere au I te ore nā ke oho ake ahau ki a Herne Bay ki roto o te whai rawa Pākehā ki te hīkoi ahau, ki tēnei whare wānanga, ki te karakia miharo.
He wakes each morning, leaves the wealthy Pākehā world behind and comes to this place of learning. It's a rongoa, a medicine.
He kākano te reo I whakatōkia ki te papa o te whenua. Whāngaihia, whainumia te kākano kia tupu o na pihi. Māhuri mai ana, ko te reo tēnā e whātoro ana kia rerera ki te keokeonga o ngā maunga kōrero. I eke ai te kōrero, I ti rearea teitei, kahikatea kataia. 1942 te tau. Nā hana te hemara te pitihana reo Māori I kōkiri. 1948 te tau, nā huirangi Waikereepuru me ngā kai whakapūmau I te reo, te kreme reo Māori I kōkiri. 1985 te tau, nā kāterina te heikōkō te kura tuatahi whakatū ki Waimarama. 1987 te tau, I ara ake te taurāwhiri I te reo Māori. Ko tahi te hiahia, a ko ngā uri kia whai I tā rātou kāore I whiwhi. Nā, e kore ngā mihi e mutu atu I konei, kia koutou kei aku rangatira. Aha kua tō koutou nā whakaheke wera, whakapetongo ia nō hoki, anei tātou e tohe tonu nei I te tohe nui, kia ora mai ai ko te reo Māori, āmohoa ki tōna nō whenua.
That was a mihi acknowledging those who have championed the revitalisation of te reo Māori, written and performed by Te Omihia Tumai. Yeah, so if we could really start with a pepeha of whatever length you like, but I'll just ask you who you are. So, tēnā koe Papa Tāwhiri, kōrero mai, ko wai koe.
Nui nā iwi kairuna I ahau, nui.
Witi Ihimāra has just described Takiura as a place of healing and rongoa, a place that's dispensing medicine for the Wairua. If that's the case, then the lead doctors here are Papa Tāwhiri Williams and his wife, Nani Ka. They are the much revered leaders of the wānanga. At 83, Papa Tāwhiri is still running Takiura, hands-on. And as he just said, nui ngā iwi, many of the tribes of his whakapapa.
Bueno, te tāki taku pāma, te tāki taku papa. Bueno, ka tikina e au e rua nā iwi. Ko tētahi iwi te tuatahi, ko te whakatōhea. Ko taku maunga, ko mākio. Ko taku awa, ko wai aua. O nuna mo. E rua waku marae. Ko o maramutu tētahi, ko o pape tētahi. Ko taku o ku hapu, ko ngā tirua. Ngai ta mahua. So koina e tahi iwi oku, kere pia korahi wena. I tell you what I forgot. I forgot the tūhoi part of my pepeha.
Well, you can add that in right now.
Right.
Okay.
Ka haere tōku, ka haere oku whakaro, taku pepeha, te taha kia tūhoi, ko maunga pohasu te maunga, ko he ohina mataroa, te awa, ko ngā te hāpua, ngā te hamua, te hapu. Koine tōku tūturatanga ki te whā, ki te iwi o tūhoi, ki te whārua o Ruatoki.
Tūhoi the iwi, Ruatoki the place. As well as being an important part of his pepeha, they form an important part of Papa Tāwhiri's whakapapa as a te reo Māori educator. Back in the late 1970s, he and Nani Ka embarked on something extraordinary. They were both teachers already, but then he spotted something.
I saw in the Gazette that a job had been advertised for a Ruatoki school, for the first school to start Māori medium education. And this was back in 1977.
Ruatoki, a small town in the eastern Bay of Plenty, had been chosen to have the country's first bilingual school. This is from an RNZ program at the time. Mana Māori.
The community still has one of the highest figures per head of population, where the Māori language is regarded as the first language. This factor alone was probably sufficient for the Department of Education to select the Ruatoki Primary School as the first school to offer a bilingual teaching program.
There were a few issues with Papatawhiri applying, including the fact that he was not a fluent reo Māori speaker at the time. Papatawhiri had grown up with his kuia, who spoke te reo Māori to him, but
the language that I grew up in really was the language of a grandmother talking to a grandchild, a kuia talking to her mokopuna, go to the toilet, empty the potty, plates, axe, wood, vegetables, garden. My Māori language is very elementary indeed.
like many of his generation, Tawhiri had been encouraged to pursue te ao Pākehā, so was sent from his home in Whangaparaoa, Cape Runaway, to school in Auckland and then Auckland University. It wasn't until he met Ka that his language began to grow again. She was
from a place called Ruatahuna, the centre of the Tūhoe, and it was my living with my wife and my knowing that she was fluent in the not fluent, she was native in the language and the customs, that it grew in me.
Then that job came up at Ruatoki.
I knew that this was an opportunity for me not only to learn the language, but also to be a leader in the development of a Māori language school, even though my language was very simple.
Here's a younger-sounding Papatawhiri in that radio documentary.
As you move from one place to the next in one's teaching career, there are always new challenges because the people are different and the community is different.
Tūhoe had some very high expectations of them. Just days after they arrived, a koroa addressed Tawhiri and Ka directly from the paipai of the marae, in front of the whole community. He told Tawhiri and Ka,
"E hoa, kua tae mai ko Ruatahi, ki te koro o Ruatoki."
Of course, all of this was in te reo Māori, but Papatawhiri translates for our benefit.
He said, "E hoa, you have been chosen to be the principal of the Ruatoki school, and Ruatoki has been chosen as the first school to be given the honour and the privilege of having this kaupapa of having te reo Māori as an important integral part of the curriculum. Kāre kore kei kora te huhua nā iwi e mā takitaki ana e whakaronona kai te pēhea ka pēhea a Tūhoe e ki te kawe i te mana i te rangatiratanga o tēnei kaupapa o pato o te whakamana o te whakanui i te reo Māori i roti te kura. Kia tupato, kai roto i o ringa te mana, te Māori, te tapu o Tūhoe e pupuri ana. There are iwi throughout New Zealand, right throughout New Zealand, who are watching and looking at Ruatoki to see how well Ruatoki carries the privilege and the mana of being selected as the first school in New Zealand to be a Māori medium school. Be careful, you have the mana, the Māori, the tapu, the rangatiratanga of Tūhoe in your hands. So we'll be looking at you and looking at us. So look after us.
Kia tupato.
Ai, tupato.
They were careful. I tupato rāua. And they survived the pōhiri. They survived the intense scrutiny of the community. In fact, they thrived. This is from another RNZ documentary, Te Reo o Te Pipi Whārauroa, in 1981, celebrating the achievements of the school's tauira under the guidance of Tawhiri and Ka.
Kia whakaronga ke tātou i etahi wāhanga o nā kōrero o rangi me papa a nā tamariki o te kura o Ruatoki.
Ki hei nakorako, whakatau te papa i raro nei, whakatau te rani e tū. Whakatau te matuku mai i raro tōna, koi ei ruku hi a mana o paurata, koi ei ruku hi a mana o pauau. Whakatina kia sina te mari i Hawaii kia pupu anō kia wauau anō. Tāra atu ki te rani, iau kia eke panuku, eke tanaro, kuia taiki e.
The couple stayed in Ruatoki for 19 years, then returned to Tāmaki Makaurau, first to St John's Theological College, then to Te Wānanga Takiura o Ngā Kura Kaupapa o Aotearoa in 1998. Takiura had started out as the Māori Studies Department of the Auckland Teachers College under Tuki Nepe. In the year 2000, it became a private teacher training institution. Papa Tāwhiri and Nanny Carr's careers in Māori education have spanned a stormy but exciting time for te reo. Just a few years before they arrived in Ruatoki, a 30,000-strong petition, Te Peti Hana Reo Māori, was delivered to Parliament by campaigner Hannah Jackson and many supporters who spoke passionately about the cause. On a blustery Te Whanganui Atara Day, what turned out to be one of the major turning points in the history of te reo Māori revitalisation was witnessed by dozens of people with their coats pulled up around their taringa. Including Witi, it turns out.
I was there for the presentation of the Māori language petition. I knew Hannah very well, Hannah Jackson. I don't tell anybody any of this because in many ways it's their history, it's not my history.
This was news to us, and Eugene pressed Papa Witi for some more details.
E runga koe te ātia o te whare paramata I te wā o te petition. What did you see?
People only see the pictures of Hannah going up the stairs with the box and the petition. What they don't see is the other story of Hannah arriving in Wellington and of the various meetings that were held before then. I was actually a journalist at that time, and so I was really excited about the whole story, not just that moment that has become such a public moment.
The backstory to this moment, of course, was a century of dismal subjugation of te reo Māori. In 1867, the Native Schools Act outlawed reo Māori in class, the beginning of the formal suppression of Aotearoa's first language. From then, government policy after government policy crushed the language like a giant colonial steamroller, which kicked off a vicious circle where many Māori parents were manipulated into thinking their children would be better off focusing on English rather than their reo rangatira. As this Mana Māori presenter put it in 1978,
generations of Māori parents have been told that English is all important and Māori is just an obstacle to their children's progress at school, not to mention their chances of a secure future.
But in the second half of the 20th century, campaigners like Hannah started fighting back, and it became a movement.
Often you hear the quotation that we are two people in New Zealand, we're two races but one people, and I feel that we are objecting to being phased out, that Māori language has a natural heritage in this country, and through the language the New Zealander as a whole will get his identity, especially his cultural identity. Māori Language Day, which later became Te Wiki or Te Reo Māori, was first celebrated in the 1970s. In 1984, a Waitangi Tribunal case heard a claim by Ngā Kai Whakapumo I Te Reo, the Wellington Māori Language Board, which argued the Crown had a treaty obligation to protect and promote Te Reo Māori. By 1987, the tide was starting to turn as far as policy goes. The Māori Language Act formally defined Te Reo Māori as an official language of New Zealand and established Te Taurawhiri I Te Reo Māori, the Māori Language Commission. And in the 3 decades since then, that tide has been rushing in, including in broadcasting, with the creation of Māori TV, now known as Whakaata Māori. One of the really big wins, though, has been the arrival of kōhanga reo, literally language nests.
Around the country, the kōhanga reo centres have been started, and spearheading the concept is National Coordinator Jean Puketapu.
The concept of the kōhanga reo is bringing the family, the whānau together and looking to the future of the child. And not only the child, really, it's for all of us.
The very first kōhanga reo was set up in 1982, ki Wainui o Mata. And now there are more than 450 of them throughout Aotearoa. In fact, they're so popular and so in demand, there are long waiting lists and some whānau miss out. With language nests full and growing demand for te reo Māori lessons among all ages, even those in their 80s like Papa Witi. You could argue the whawhai that began on the steps of Te Whare Pāremata in 1972 has been won. But as 2024 rolls on, you can't escape the feeling that not everyone is embracing the renaissance of te reo Māori. Not everyone is happy about the direction of the waka.
Trump has indicated that he will leave it again. What does that mean for Aotearoa and our Pacific neighbours?
Well, I don't know this country's called that you refer to as Aotearoa. The country I'm talking about is called New Zealand, and not some French Polynesian name.
This is the New Zealand First Leader and Foreign Minister Winston Peters.
That's the first thing we'll get right, so that they're not confused in America as to this country they've never heard of. The second thing is the Pacific.
Cabinet's agreed on the outline of what the treaty principles will look like, similar to what was in the ex-coalition agreement.
And this is ACT leader David Seymour.
With some additional acknowledgement of the rights of hapu and iwi, which I would say were already covered by upholding the rights of all New Zealanders, so I think that's a recognition.
Back at Takiura, one of the tauira in Papa Witi's akomanga, in fact, one of the people who was strumming his raku during that rendition of Aku Mahi that Witi enjoyed so much, was Harry Dowling. Harry's 25, and we caught up with him to find out about the experience for a younger tauira.
That's for you. That's for me. Ko Harry Dowling ahau, no te taitoku e rau ahau, e rangi I tipu ake ahau ki te taha o oku mātua ki Kirikiri roa. Hoi anō I te taha o tōku matua, ko ngā toki mata whaorua tōku waka, ko Punaki Tere tōku aua, ko Kirioke tōku maunga, ko Te Iringa te tōku marae, ko Ngāti Tautahi tōku hapu, ko Ngāpuhi tōku iwi, ko Rahiri tōku rangatira, ko Te Munu te ngoa o tōku whānau whānui.
Kia ora, kia ora. Kōrero tia mai tō haerenga reo Māori. Tell me a bit about you and te reo, from the very first kupu you remember learning through to your enrolment at Takiura.
Ai. I haere hau ki Hamilton Boys High School, koera tōku kura tuarua, nō reira, ko tērā te timatanga o tāku haerenga, I roto I tēnei ao Māori. So in year 11, that was when I did my first te reo Māori subject course, but because of the restrictions in the number of classes that you can take at high school, I could only take it for that 1 year, and then the last 2 years at high school I needed to kind of hone into what I wanted to do at university.
After high school, Harry moved to Auckland to study at Auckland University.
Te whare wānanga o Waipapa Taumatarau, ki reira e noho I ako ahau I runga I te tohu ture me te toi pia. So I did a Bachelor of Law and Arts conjoint degree.
At first, his arts majors were English and economics, but then something happened. Something that gave him an impetus to switch to Māori studies.
My dad passed away in my second year of uni, and he was kind of like the māngai for my whānau on my marae, and one of the only ones who could speak Māori. He was still learning, still quite a basic level of te reo at that point. So that definitely encouraged me into the direction of learning more about te ao Māori and tikanga Māori, and to be able to kōrero and te reo Māori as well, and kind of lead my whānau in that direction.
After he graduated, Harry started work as a lawyer. Then he and his wife both decided to take a year out to study at Takiura. While there may be many years between Harry and Papa Witi,
ahua rangatahi tonu.
When they're in class, they're just two tauira on their haerenga reo together. That's meant some mahitahi, working together in groups on the different exercises and tasks set by Whaia Shah.
So we were given the haka to do. So it was myself, Papa Witi, and then another kaumātua. And so we were thinking we might not be the right group to do a haka at the start, but Papa Witi was very keen, and he is a great writer. We were all working together to come up with a few lines, and I was thinking that the kaumātua might be a bit quiet and they might have to like really energize him, but they were amazing. Ringa ringa pakia, wai wai takahia e kino nei hoki. Katoa tātou I au I ahau, hi ha ue ha hi.
I kimi mātou, I patu patu a mātou e. Toa toa a mātou te toa, I a ha ha, he.
Tēnā pai.
Aye. So a lot of this is really uplifting and elevating.
We've seen that ourselves in the akomanga, how it can be uplifting and joyful. But there's no denying he ua ua te mahi me ngā wero. Through that, though, tauira find support from each other. And Witi told me and Eugene that Harry has been one of those people who's helped him.
In the immediacy of the class relationship, when we have an hour and a half per session to get through a particular slice of work, and I could see that the others, instead of grasping for something to hold on to, were actually swimming in it and reveling in it, and I wasn't. And so therefore there were these moments of doubt. And if it wasn't for people like Harry, all of them, I could have drowned many times.
What was their advice to you?
Well, we always used to say hi there too. You know, it was just a brief word or two and a bit of a hug. And even now we're still saying that to each other. How are you getting on? We made a pact at the very beginning, which was that we wouldn't leave anybody behind. And so we're all driven to make sure that we will all make it.
He kaha te whanangatanga o te akomanga ne.
Yes, that's a good point to make. We're making it because Whaia Shah is hugely inspiring, and she has inspired us to do our very, very best together.
Sometimes Witi has struggled not being able to contribute as much as he wants to in the akomanga.
It's been amazing to see his progression in the language.
Ko Harry anō.
We had a conversation with Papa Witi quite early on in the year where he felt like he was struggling a little bit more than other people and was finding it a bit hard to keep up with the pace within the akomanga. And another conversation where we had entered the full immersion, the rumaki reo stage of the year, and he felt like he couldn't share his pūrākau or his stories that he knew in te reo Māori well enough, and so he felt like he couldn't share them at all.
There have been times when I've been really, really, really angry because I have been unable to contribute to the class in te reo. So when they are talking in te reo about a particular concept or a particular principle, and then I can hear Whaia Shah trying to use pūrākau as examples. And I know all of these pūrākau, and I keep on thinking, well, if only I could speak in Māori, then I'd be able to tell them. But because I can't, I just shut down. There's nothing that I can do about it, except say to myself, sorry, if I could, I would do this for you, but I can't.
My wife and I were kind of saying to him, we would be missing out so much if you don't share them, and I'm sure that our teacher will be fine if you do as much as you can in te reo and then go to te reo Pākehā.
And I know that they've welcomed it. When we began the course and I was able to talk in English and talk about all of the stories of navigating the stars. But as time went by, I became more and more frustrated at my own inabilities to be able to share that information. However, now we've reached the more than halfway mark, and I hope that what I've been able to share with them has been fulfilling for the whānau.
Oh,
there's no question.
Kaore kore, they see you as a taonga, or certainly from what's been described to us, and that you have given them many koha.
Definitely the memories that stand out to me of him are when he just stands up in the akomanga that no one's asked him to or anything, and he just shares. And some people might be like, oh, I want to learn, I want to do my kupuho or whatever, but I'm like, this is so much mātauranga that we're hearing here.
Of course, the most stressful moment, takiura, is standing to kōrero for the whakapuaki of ever-increasing length. And it's not just about the kōrero itself. You're also expected to answer questions from the akomanga about what you've just said, as Harry explains.
Ai, te timatanga o te tau, ko te whakapuaki tuatahi, ko te roa e waru miniti. Nō reira, he āhua māma māku ki te whakarite mō tērā whakapuaki. Tā te mea kataia e au te whakamaumahara i te katoa o tāku whakapuaki kātahi katu ki te tuku. Ko te wero i ngā pātai whai muri i tāku kōrero.
Early in the year, answering those questions wasn't actually too hard because tauira were allowed to use reo Pākehā for the Q&A.
E rangi, i taua wā, ka taia o ka āhei tātou katoa ki te whakahoki i ngā pātai i roto i te reo Pākehā. Nō reira, i taua wā he māma ake ki te whakahoki i ngā pātai.
Later on, though, as the whakapuaki got longer, the rules for the pātai atu pātai mai also got stricter.
You had to stay in te reo Māori when answering the questions, so that kind of added an element where you really needed to understand what the questions were saying and be able to then deliver an answer. So I think that was a very challenging thing for some people.
Papa Witi tells us that delivering these whakapuaki has left him
bewitched, bothered and bewildered. I'll tell you what, it has been hard to stand. The last one I did, we had the weekend, and then I was one of the ones to stand on the Monday. You just have to do it.
In case it wasn't obvious, we weren't there to see Witi deliver that whakapuaki either. As the year has gone on, it's become increasingly clear that Witi doesn't feel comfortable with us being there for ngā whakapuaki. It's something we need to address with him. So Eugene gently brings it up.
Whakapuaki is such a big thing of takiura, and you know that we were pushing and pushing to get in to record them and be in the akomanga when they were delivered, and then we sensed that there was a resistance to that, and so we backed off. Can you perhaps kōrero mai, he aha te your whakaro around that? What was it about the whakapuaki that made you feel that way?
It wasn't actually about myself. What it was about exposing the rest of the class within a classroom setting. So I was looking at the context of the recording of the whakapuaki rather than my delivering the whakapuaki itself. That said, because I've never been a person who normally does stand to kōrero, and because of my ineptness with te reo, I didn't want to have myself recorded with my damaged reo. And I mean damaged, damaged by colonisation, damaged by trauma. I didn't feel as if I wanted to be represented by damage. What I wanted to be was to be represented by tika and by pono. And so that is the other reason why I backed away.
Epa, he tangata kaha i te reo Māori. He taonga.
I don't feel that way, but I'll tell you what. The good thing about not being that way is that it means that the creative part of my brain, when I am recreating it on the page, will struggle. And in that struggle will come this fantastic new work. That's the way it always has been with me. I've not really necessarily known everything about a particular subject, but doing it in the moment is where the magic happens.
So it's a strength.
Damaged reo, damaged by colonisation, damaged by trauma. If you spend any time in a reo Māori class or speak with a reo Māori learner, it's a kaupapa which will come up because it's a thing. It's not just some throwaway line. Remember, in our last episode, Whaia Shah talked about it, how she helps tauira go through it, dealing with that kōwhao, that hole that she can help to mirimiri. It goes back to that hītori, the subjugation of te reo Māori, the injustice, the trampling of te reo rangatira. These things weren't just racist policies, they were taiaha, I pātua ngā iwi, ngā hapū, me ngā whānau. And while much has been done in the past 50 years to rejuvenate te reo Māori, the scars are deep, kua mamai tonu. But Witi's talking not just about that. During one of our interviews, Papa Witi shared something personal that he had realised had become one of the impediments on his haerenga reo Māori. He was telling us about his memoirs.
The first one is called Māori Boy. The second is called Native Son. The third one will be called Indigenous Envoy.
So, these puka puka.
They engage with so many different problematics that I have experienced in my life as a two-melt person, as a person of two kinds of sexualities also, you know. And the most important thread has been to follow the pathway back to the time when I was raped as a child, and then to explore what has happened in terms of the way that I think, coming from that particular origin story.
When Witi first publicly disclosed this sexual assault in his memoirs, he was in his 70s, and he was uncovering a dark secret, but also trying to trace the impacts it has had throughout his life.
One of those other origin stories is the battle that I have had with an inferiority complex about the fact that I can't speak Māori. I'm not good enough.
It's only been very recently that Witi's been able to see how those origin stories are connected.
And perhaps one of the potent moments was when my cousin died. He had been the most generous and wonderful cousin and had looked after me a lot when I could have had a hiding. And so I went to his tangi in Waitangi. Going to the tangi and having that opportunity to talk to him in the whare was terrific. The moment was transcendent. The thing that came to me afterwards was, while I could speak to him in English and say goodbye to him in English, I couldn't say goodbye in te reo. Now, why hasn't that discovery happened before? Why am I feeling like this? Why has it had to wait until this time? And I think that is because I didn't come to grips with what had happened to me sexually until I was 79. I am in the age of my magnificence. Many things that have been at the door wanting to come in are now coming through that door.
E haere akene, coming up in the next episode of Witi Underwater.
We've got this, we're so close. Just turn up.
Wild times in the akomanga.
I was right down the other end of the classroom, like, e heke, get down now.
Wild times in the kohanga reo.
Kia ora, morena, tamariki ma. Morena. Hi.
And some wisdom from the moana.
Beep, 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 beep. Paua, paua, oa, 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 oa. Fight like the octopus.
Ko Adam Daringaho, ko Maua, ko Eugene Bingham, ngā kaituhi, me ngā kaiwhakaputa o tēnei kōnai ipurangi. Ko James Danzi te kai tito, ko Au te kai huahua oro, ko Andrew McDowell te kai pūkaha oro, ko Te Omihia Tumai te mātanga reo, ko Pai Tāwhiti te kai karakia, ko Iana te Nahu Owen te kai kōmihana Māori ki te reo irarangi o Aotearoa, ka nui te mihi ki te maungai pāho. Audio archive material in this episode was sourced with the assistance of Mātauranga Sound and Vision. We would like to acknowledge the composers of the Muri Whenua Waiata, Ross Norman, Sana Waitai Murray, and Te Paia Waitai of Ngāti Kuri. Mātou mihi nunui ki te Kōhene Ponika Whānau Trust for the use of the Waiata Aku Mahi. A ko o mātou mihi nunui ki ngā rangatira, ki ngā kaiako, ki ngā tauira o te wānanga takiura o ngā kura kaupapa Māori o Aotearoa. Wai hoki kia papa witi I he maira.
Unuhia, unuhia. Unuhia te tapu o tēnei wānanga. Unuhia te tapu o ēnei kōrero. Unuhia te tapu o tua whakarere. Kia wātea, kia māma. Te tīnana, te wairua, te ngākau, te whatumanawa. Kia puta ai ki te taha tika. Kia puta ai ki te taha wātea. Kia puta ai ki te whaiao, ki te ao mārama. Tau mai te mauri.
Haumi e.
Hui e.
Tai ki e.
Ko te reo, te take.